If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's the scariest, unexplainable thing you've seen that you haven't shared with anyone? Towards the back of my best friend's neighborhood was a road that ran into the woods. We decided to go exploring down there one night just for fun. As we walked down the hill, we looked over the guardrail to see this deer carcass that had been completely picked clean. And we were like, well, it's nature, whatever. So we kept going, just chatting and joking and whatnot. All of a sudden, my friend goes silent. I look at her, and she's all bug-eyed, looking at something by the stream. There was this massive shape hunched over the water, leaning down like it was drinking. Bears don't typically frequent the part of Maryland I'm from, so I knew it wasn't a bear. When it saw us looking at it, it stood up really quickly. And it was huge. Probably close to 7 feet tall, if I had to guess. It mainly just looked like a giant, human-shaped shadow wearing a black robe. So we booked it out of there, and my friend kept screaming, "Don't look back. Don't look back." But I did, because I was scared to death that the thing was chasing us, and when I looked back, it was watching us run away from beside the guardrail very close to where we'd been standing. So we told her dad about it the next morning, and he said, road name? I was riding through there on my motorcycle once, and I saw this huge, black shadow standing on top of the hill looking down at the road. Some background: it was a few years ago, just after my final year in high school. My parents asked if I would be interested in a job at a camp that was owned by our church. During that point I didn't have anything going on work or school-wise, so I decided to give it a shot. I took the job of seasonal groundskeeper. Work consisted of me and another person, whom I will refer to as Jay, doing yard work and maintaining the cleanliness of the camp. Around 6 weeks through the season we had been given a large project by the camp director. We needed to clear out large field that had been overgrown due to lack of use. Although we had been given the week to complete it, we got the good chunk of it done in the first 3 days. I was not told the reason for Jay needing the day off, but knowing him, it was probably a speeding ticket. Unfortunately, that left me alone to try to finish up the field. I worked for an hour or two clearing fallen branches, cutting the grass, and transporting debris to a dump site with a mule cart. I would occasionally hear animals moving in the wooded area surrounding the field. Likely 1 or 2 deer going towards the lake, but some sounded almost like a person talking. Thinking that I was just being paranoid, I continued to work. I had finished dumping some debris and headed back to the field. As I entered the field, something caught my eye, a bipedal figure about 50 yards from the entrance. I was confused. Did my partner come back to work? I called him on the radio to ask what he was doing. No answer. I tried again, nothing. My next action is the one I regret making. I drove over to the figure. What I saw was disturbing: a pale taxidermy man. The stitches were visible and some parts were missing. I turned and got in the cart. I drove as fast as I could to the main building of the camp. An hour later the police arrived. I returned to the field with them as well as the director. The taxidermy man was gone, and in its place were a few shoe prints leading into the thick wooded area. Obviously I had to give a statement, but with no evidence. That was the extent that they could investigate. This happened last summer and still freaks me out, but I didn't want to tell anyone cause they'd just dismiss it. I was working at a bakery and around 2 p.m.-ish it starts getting really quiet, only a handful of people coming in, so I was starting to clear things away. We close at 3 on weekends, when I suddenly had this weird urge to look out the window. I didn't stop cleaning, but I looked up out the glass display and the opposite street was completely frozen. People were still walking in front of the shop and cars driving in the lane nearest to us, but on the other side and in the other lane it was all frozen. No traffic or anything, just people frozen mid-step. This lasted a second or two before things started moving again. I barely spoke the rest of my shift, trying to figure out if everything had really stopped like that. I've seen another glitch since then fairly recently, laying out in my garden, watching a bird fly past me, quite close, when it seemed to disappear behind a bush that was on the other side of the garden. The bird seemed nearly as big as the bush because of the perspective, as it was flying within about a meter of me, but it looked like it had flown behind the bush, which was at least 5 meters away. Regardless, the image of all those people frozen still sends a shiver down my spine. This happened a few years back, when I was around 15. I lived in the middle of a rainforest. I had around 2 neighbors all living kilometers away. There's an old walking track that runs along a creek. It leads to various swimming holes in a more populated suburban area. I used to take my dog for a walk every morning. We'd go to a particular swimming hole, have a swim and walk back. Every single morning. Both the path and creek was dead silence, eerie. No one would walk on the path, or swim. There was always a slight mist of rain draping the rainforest. Funny that, no matter the season. One of these mornings, we made it to the swimming hole perfectly fine. Nothing out of the usual. When my dog and I got into the icy cold water, that's when something happened. I started to feel someone watching me. I could feel it in the back of my neck. I turned around and looked up the stream near the rusting bridge. I saw a figure standing in the shadows right next to the shore. I froze. My dog looked at him too. Of course my dog started to whine. At that point I started to get out and walk back along the path. Getting back to my house was only about a 8 km walk, so not far. As we started to walk through the rainforest, my dog kept stopping and profusely looked behind us. I had probably done about 2 km when I started to hear footsteps behind, resonating from behind. Heavy footsteps. Almost as if there was multiple people stomping to a rhythm. Yet again my dog was looking behind us, whining and barking. Every single time I looked behind us, there was nothing but the sound. The footsteps became closer, closer and closer. Until it sounded like there was a squadron right behind me. When I stopped and turned around, a face appeared. He let out an abhorrent scream and yelled floods. I fell down to the ground beside me, and the marching footsteps carried on. The face disappearing as quick as it appeared. There's a local legend here that I found out after that day. Apparently during World War II some Anzac soldiers had to patrol the mountain and rainforest that I call home. They made their way to a now popular swimming hole, but as they started to swim, flash floods took place. The soldiers swimming got swept with the strong current, and got trapped underneath a large rock that was there, drowning them all. One solider who was swimming, climbed a tree and watched his mates die. My dog never ever stepped foot along those paths again. He just flat out refused to walk near them, and I guess with good reason too. Maybe 7 or 8 years ago now, I was getting changed in my room, ready for school, and could hear my mom in the hallway getting ready for work. I leave my bedroom and head to the kitchen to grab my lunch for the day, when all of a sudden I feel, what I then expected, was my mom tapping me on the back, and saying my name. Of course I turned around to say good morning, but no one was there, literally no one. I definitely heard someone call my name and touch me on the back. I was pretty creeped out, so I called out to my mother to let her know what just happened, but she wasn't anywhere in the house, so I looked outside and saw that her car was gone. A couple of minutes later the landline rings and it's my mother. She called to let me know that she left early for a meeting and that my lunch was on the side. Still creeps me out thinking about it. I 100% heard someone else in the house moving around, and I'm certain someone said my name plain as day and tapped me on the shoulder. One day when I was about 10, my mom told my brothers and I to quickly and quietly get ready because we were going for a walk. When we left our house, I turned and saw someone looking out the window at us. My mom later explained that she had an uneasy feeling lately. The dog was afraid to go in the basement, and my mom noticed random things go missing. Food from the fridge, a spare key by the door, pictures out of frames. That day, she went down to the basement to switch the laundry over to the dryer. As she walked back up the stairs, she heard the dryer door open. She went down and saw the clothes on the ground, and put them back in and started the machine again. She walked back up the stairs and heard the dryer door open again, but this time she also heard someone giggle and whisper. She shut the basement door, put a chair in front of it, and when she went to grab her large knife she kept for protection, it was gone. I told my mom there was someone watching from the window. I know, keep walking. We went to my grandmother's house and my mom went back, and the police had arrested 2 squatters who lived in the basement for a couple of weeks. There was a second room in the basement that was mainly old wood and furniture that belonged to the landlord. When my mom went inside, she saw the basement door was open, the chair flung across the room, and the bedrooms were all torn apart, the mattresses cut. We moved not long after. Back in 2018, my girlfriend and I lived in a mobile home that we were renting, and we decided we would go look at a house to buy for our first house. We were both 20, I had bought a 2005 Harley Davidson a few months prior and she loved to ride, so we decided to take the bike, so we geared up to leave. After we got on the bike I had an uneasy feeling, so I got off and inspected her gear since she was far less experienced than me. Sure enough, her helmet was super loose, so I tightened it down for her and we headed out. We made it about half a mile when an F550 company truck hit us head on. DUI, we slid about 100 feet and got rushed to the hospital. I had permanent knee damage, a concussion, road rash on my knee, back, arm, and butt. She shattered her arm and needed surgery. Her helmet was destroyed in the accident. Fast forward to March of 2020, we are well off in a house we bought in 2019, I bought another bike, and I had a 2018 Camaro, and we just had our sweet baby girl in January. Life is great and we healed up great besides my knee damage. While I was getting off of nights in March, oil field, and I was in the Camaro, I was driving and kind of had a vision of me in a terrible accident, so when I got to a red light I waited a few seconds after the light turned green before taking off. I took off in a car, ran the red light and smoked my front while doing 75 and totaled the car. If I would have taken off like normal, he would have T-boned me and I can't say he'd be alive. If I wouldn't have tightened her helmet down, I can't say she would be here today. I have no idea how I knew, but I did. It terrifies me to this day, but I'm so thankful. Thanks for reading. I've got 2 stories that I can't really explain at all. 1, my best friend lived on a farm about 15 minutes outside of the town I grew up in. By 18 I was very familiar with all the roads around his place. So one night we're coming back from a band practice, we were in a garage band, and we passed by a farmhouse and noticed the top bedroom light is on. This is extremely odd, cause nobody had lived there since we were in middle school. It was abandoned after a farmer shot himself in front of his family. After something like that, it's hard to sell. Anyway, we're cruising past and my buddy tells me to turn around. So I do and we stop at the entrance to the driveway. Sure enough, bedroom light is on, no other lights. No vehicles, gate was still closed and looked like it had been so for a while. More creepy, there was someone, or something, up there. The place had been boarded up and we didn't see any signs of someone going in. We watched it for maybe 5 minutes, just seemed to pace around the room, then it looked like it turned towards the window that we were looking at. That's all we needed and got the hell out of Dodge. Next day we decided to go back and take a closer look. From the outside everything was still boarded up, so who knows what that all was. About a year or 2 later they tore the place down. A guy I know was on the crew. I told him our story and he just shook his head. He said there's no way a light would have worked in that house. The power had been cut off to the house for years. 2. I was driving home late one night from a bonfire. Because I drove myself, I wasn't drinking. I was a few miles from my town when I suddenly saw what looked like a woman on the side of the road. It looked like she was going to run into the road with her hands up like she was signaling me to stop. Out of instinct I slammed on my brakes hard. When I stopped there was nobody. But as I started up, a pickup with no headlights on flew through the intersection in front of me without stopping. Had I not slammed my brakes on, I would have been broadsided hard by that truck. I called the police and reported them for unsafe driving. The next day I got a call from them. They tell me they caught the guys. All 3 guys in the truck were hammered. The driver had a suspended license already. I swear to this day I saw a woman on the road, guaranteed. There's no other reason I would have slammed on my brakes. Ghost or angel? Who knows, but whatever it was quite possibly saved my life. Most unexplainable was passing a woman in a flowing robe walking down the oncoming traffic lane in a rural canyon road at midnight in mid-December in freezing weather. At least I think it was a woman. There were no houses for miles in the direction she was walking. No reason anyone would be on that road walking, no cars further down the road, no way for me to turn around since the lanes were divided, and nobody would be out in that weather at that time with those clothes. I was so confused. Most creepy was when I was invited over for dinner at a really kind middle-aged lady's house in Japan. I am from America but speak Japanese. Her husband was kinda out of it. He would do the 1,000-yard stare and not answer you when you asked him the same question 3 times. Obviously not all the way there until he would suddenly switch back on and reply. She is a talker and all of a sudden I make out through my imperfect Japanese that she is confessing that she tried to smother her 3-year-old child and got put in a mental institution. She kept having a glossy-eyed look that freaked me out. Never went back. She also had a little bird that would be calm and suddenly start making tons of noise randomly. Added to the mood. True story. When I was a toddler, probably 4 or 5 years old, just barely old enough to have memories, my parents took me to some weird festival thing at nighttime that was extremely crowded, almost shoulder to shoulder everywhere you went. I was trying to follow my parents but I got lost in the crowd, and I had no idea where they went. So me being a little kid, I started crying because I didn't know where my parents were. I started walking through this crowd of people and eventually found the front gate of the festival and I thought they had left, so I decided to leave too so I could try to find them. So I walked towards a rickety-looking lamp post on this gravel road at night, and an old man appeared suddenly by the pole. The only things I remember about his appearance was that he was very old, maybe in his 80s, he had glasses, and his ears were absolutely enormous. They were circular in shape and sticking out at least a full 2 inches from each side of his head. He asked me if I was lost, and while crying I said, "Yeah, I want to find my parents and go home." And he crouched over to look directly at me and said, "Are those your parents?" And pointed behind me. I turned around and found my parents walking around panicking over by the front gate, asking everyone in sight if they saw a child. As soon as I saw them, I yelled "Mama! Daddy!" and ran towards them. They saw me and picked me up to hug me, and I remember looking back at the lamp post while my dad held me, and the old man was gone. Disappeared into thin air. I remember saying, "Where did he go?" and pointed at the lamp. My parents asked me what I was talking about, and I told them about the man that showed me where to look. And they looked around to try to thank him, but they never found him. My mother-in-law passed away at age 92. During the funeral preparations, my husband said his mother had expressed a desire near the end of her life to have two old neighbors, from a place she'd moved from 50 years prior, come to her funeral. My husband told his mother he would do his best, but it was doubtful they still lived there and he wasn't sure how to find them. They had very common Hispanic names. The day after she passed away, my husband traveled to the old neighborhood of his mother, and of course the neighbors had long ago moved and no one knew where. The Sunday before her funeral, my husband and I attended Mass at the church of his youth, a church his mother had asked to be buried from. Neither of us had been to the large church in decades. We took a spot near the rear of the church. After Mass began, a man came and sat in the pew directly in front of us. My husband said a prayer to his mother, saying he was sorry he could not find the neighbors and asking her forgiveness. During the Mass there is a handshake of peace where congregates turn and acknowledge each other. The man in front of us turned around to us and, startled, called my husband by name. It was the son of the neighbors my husband had been looking for. My husband did not even recognize him, but he recognized my husband and called him by name. He had just been visiting his parents for the weekend at their new home and only at the last minute decided he would come to Mass before leaving town. We exchanged information, and just as his mother had asked, her neighbors were at her funeral 2 days later. If I hadn't been there, I would not have believed it. I was 8 or 9, and on the very first, and last, sleepover of my childhood. I also had very short hair, as my mother had cut my waist-length auburn hair the minute my dad had gone away for work. I hadn't wanted her to, and neither had my dad. She was just a bitch. So, I go to this girl's house, we have dinner, her parents are really sweet to me. First time I was allowed to leave foods I didn't like on my plate without punishment, etc., and then myself, the girl, and her 2 older sisters all settle onto the couch as cushions in the living room to watch films, paint nails, and eventually sleep. The older sister was, I think, about 15, so seemed very grown up to me, and for whatever reason she seemed really interested in talking to me and finding out about me. She was the first person to whom I admitted what my home life was like, about the abuse from my mother, and I cried a lot about my hair in particular as this poor teenager hugged me. Eventually we all went to sleep. I woke up the next morning with a long, thin plait hanging down from a section of my short hair. It reached past my shoulders. As first I thought it was something one of the girls had clipped into my hair as a joke, but when I pulled it, it was rooted to my scalp. It was real hair. The girls and their mother all had blonde hair, their father black, and this was my own natural shade of auburn, so it wasn't something they could have glued to my head for a joke for whatever reason. I was freaking out, and it woke the others, who then proceeded to freak out themselves. We woke their mother, who at first thought we were playing a prank. When she sat me down in the bathroom and had a proper look, though, she went pale. It was my hair, growing from my scalp, and it was weird. I begged her to cut it out, knowing my own mother would assume I'd stuck it to my head somehow and punish me, so she did. Again, where she cut, the shorter hair was identical to the rest of my head. She just had a 1/2-inch thick, 6-inch long plait of my hair in her hand. She took me home before breakfast, dropping me off outside. My mother didn't ask me why, just assumed I'd misbehaved and punished me with no food for the rest of the weekend. I never told her about it, and none of the girls spoke to me again. I was already a bullied kid at school, but it got worse, although it seemed none of the girls never told anyone what we had seen. Once upon a lifetime ago I drove truck OTR. I was parked for the night at a truck stop in the middle of nowhere. I went in to use the bathroom and the girls told me to make sure I got everything I needed before they locked up at 8:50 p.m. because there wouldn't be anyone there until 8 a.m. I remarked that 8:50 is an odd time to close a truck stop, and they said that there was no way in hell they were going to be on the premises at 9 p.m. or later. Got everything done that I needed and went out to the truck to get ready to go to bed for the night. As soon as 8:50 p.m. hit, they locked up and their rides were waiting out front. They were gone by 8:55 p.m. At 9 it got really quiet. It was one of those clear nights where there isn't even a breeze. Shortly after that my truck started rocking. To the point that I double-checked my brakes to make sure I had set both the tractor and the trailer brakes. It started rocking so bad that I couldn't stand up without holding on to anything because I was getting tossed around. I got out to see what was going on and the truck wasn't moving. Got back in and the rocking stopped. Then the voices started. I could hear people talking to themselves. Again, get out and check and nothing. Get back in and now I can hear people in my trailer. My locked trailer. And the truck starts moving again. Almost like they were trying to unload me. Except I backed up against a 6 to 7 snow pile when I parked to make sure I didn't have to worry when I slept. Got out to check and nothing. At that point I started to debate breaking hours of service and drive to another spot to park. But with e-logs I didn't know how that would work. So I stayed the night at a haunted truck stop and didn't sleep much. Marked it down in my truck stop book as somewhere to avoid. When I was younger, probably about 6 or 7, we went to visit my family in Pakistan. We live in the USA for a few weeks. I always had an obsession with farm animals since there aren't many where I live in the US. My older cousin knew of a small farm about 10-minute walk from our house in Pakistan. So we went one morning after breakfast. We get to the little farm. Typical goats, cows, and chickens. Then we start to walk through this eerily dark barn, I guess you could call it that. Looked kinda like a horse stable. On the other side there was a decent-sized pond. We went to the pond and it was just my cousin and I looking at the water. Out of nowhere there was a huge splash that came out of nowhere. No jumping fish, no one in sight that could have thrown a rock. Just a random big splash. So we started to run. We ran through the creepy barn and as I was getting to the other side a stack of hay just fell over on its own. We ran through the main gate of the farm and the gate closed behind us on its own as well. Now folks, this was back in the late 90s, in rural Pakistan where they barely have electricity. There was no such thing as automatic closing gates there. Something was telling us to leave and didn't want us there. Then it closed the gates as if it was telling us to never come back. I'm getting goosebumps just typing this. When I was around 12 years old, me and my little 8-year-old brother discovered a hidden room in a rental our family stayed in for 2 months. There was a cabinet built into the wall next to the stairs. It had a sliding wooden door and a couple of shelves in it. Very strange place for a cabinet. Well, the one day, my brother hid his remote control car in the cabinet and was playing with it with the remote, making it rev up from its super hidden location as he kept pressing me to try and find it. Ha! So I go down the stairs and open the cabinet, where he's obviously hidden it, and grab his car but realize the shelving unit behind the sliding wooden doors is pushed back slightly. There's about an inch gap between the sliding doors and the unit, so I pull on the shelves and the entire box with the shelves in it come out, leaving a square hole in the wall that extends back about 3 to 4 feet back leading into another room. And keep in mind this square that fit the whole shelving box in it was about 2x2. Small enough an adult would have trouble crawling through it. So I coax my brother down and we crawl in. At the end of the square cubbyhole we come out to a full room. The roof was probably 4 feet tall and there was a fully furnished bed with a frame and a nightstand beside it. Gave me full body chills. Either that room was sealed up and built around that or the furniture was set up and built inside it. I remember us showing my parents and them being unnerved. We weren't there for long and I can't remember if my parents told the landlords or whatever became of it. I should bring it up to my mother perhaps and ask if she remembers. Not sure if this belongs here, but to this day it's strange to think about and is something I don't ever really bring up or tell people about. Not what I saw but what I heard. I was on a solo motorcycle trip across the great USA. From New York, to southern Florida then straight across to Los Angeles. I crashed at 80 miles per hour, ran from a shooting in New Orleans, and a guy hyped up on crystal meth tried to fight me, but none beats the chill I felt deep in the woods of Louisiana. I camped at national parks 85% of the trip and loved meeting the people there. No real scary animal encounters, all was good. This particular day was Thanksgiving 2015. I came out of the local market with my dinner for the night and a little camp spot in mind. A father and his son saw me and my motorcycle, so they stopped by to chat. All was well, until he asked me where I was planning on staying that night. I told him. His face went white. He begged me not to go. I asked why. He said there's a group that practices dark arts in the woods around there, particularly during Thanksgiving. He said people have been known to go missing. Needless to say I was freaked, but the night was coming fast and there weren't any nearby alternatives. I told him I would heed his advice, but ultimately, I went anyway. No one was at the camp spot, but there were a few RVs. I thought it was odd, but was happy for some peace and quiet. I made a fire, ate some turkey out of a bag, and tried to relax, but something about the place was off. I cannot explain it, but it was kind of like the feeling of being watched, coupled with the fact that these RVs seemed recently used and had stealable belongings hanging around. Motorcycling day in and day out takes a huge toll on your body. I was tired as hell, but that hazy feeling was keeping me up. After a few hours I decided I needed sleep or risk repercussions the next day. I let the fire die down and crawled into my tent. Just as I settled in, I heard it. A terrible guttural sound. It was unlike anything I've ever heard. An equal mix of a human scream and an animal dying. One dying scream, as it were. Just once. It felt close but also far. Chills pulsated throughout my body, instantly activating my fight or flight. I jumped out of my tent, and shined my flashlight in that direction. Nothing. I picked up a rock and slowly crept around, but once again, nothing. Needless to say, I didn't sleep a wink that night, but no one ever showed up. I can still hear that scream and feel those chills when I think about it. I was in junior high and my parents and I were going to take a trip to the Dominican Republic to go to an uncle's wedding. My parents were taking me, but my brothers were staying with my grandmother. My mom has been looking forward to it because that uncle was her favorite cousin and he had lived with my grandparents and her for a while growing up. That morning we wake up at about 4 a.m. and my mother is pale, and she tells my father that she had a bad dream about the flight and didn't want to go today. Her grandmother, who passed away a couple of years before this trip, I don't remember how long ago, but I still remember visiting her, was in her dream telling her not to go today because it wasn't her time yet. Now this was soon after 9 to 11 and my dad tells her that security is going to be tight, the airlines are going to be super cautious about maintenance and there is nothing to worry about. My dad is pretty adamant about not wanting to spend money on changing the ticket, so we take off to drop off my brothers at grandma's. We get there and grandma tells my mother that her mother was a dream telling her to keep my mother from going today. So now my mom is panicked, and honestly I'm scared because mom is scared. My mom tells my dad there is no way she is leaving today in Spanish and my mother never curses, and that we are leaving tomorrow. My dad is pissed and we all go back home. I'm pissed because I was going to skip school for a week and my parents make me go that day. I go to school and about 11 o'clock I'm called to the office. My dad is in the office and he signs me out telling me my mom wants all of the kids home. I get home and my mom, grandma, and a bunch of family members are there freaking the hell out. I find out the plane we would have been on crashed after taking off and they think there were no survivors. My parents end up going to the wedding a couple of days later without me. I remember being nervous as hell on the day they left and came back. I don't believe in ghosts, but I still don't know what occurred. Let me preface this by stating that I'm not Catholic. I'm not religious at all, I'm atheist, and grew up in a non-religious household. I've seen and experienced some weird stuff, but that's never made me believe in anything supernatural. I believe there are things we can't explain yet, but that doesn't make them supernatural. So, a few years ago, one of my daughter's friends got pregnant. I won't go into details, but it was a bad situation, and she was on the other side of the country. We were doing what we could to help, sending money and emotional support, but honestly we couldn't do much. Toward the end of the pregnancy, I start having dreams about some guy named St. Gerard. He didn't introduce himself as such, I just knew that was his name. He kept trying to tell me something about my daughter's friend, but I couldn't understand him. He was speaking Italian, which I don't speak or even read. At the time my daughter was really into MCR, so I joked that her band obsession was affecting my dreams. I figured my mind had thrown together St. Gerard, because, dreams are weird like that. The last dream, this guy is crying, really obviously frustrated, right up in my face and shaking me by my shoulders. I woke up kind of freaked out by that, because the emotion was just overwhelming. My daughter's friend texted later that day, and sent me a photo of her belly. I immediately felt like something was off, and told her to go to the hospital. She said she was going to take a bath, and if she still felt bad, she'd go in. She called the next day to tell us she'd had a stillbirth. In a ward dedicated to St. Gerard, the patron saint of pregnant women who I had never heard of. And when I looked him up, there was the little guy I'd been dreaming about for weeks. The official icons look nothing like him, but there's a portrait that's dead on his face and body type and narrow little hands. I'm still atheist, BTW, and probably always will be, but that's the creepiest thing that's ever happened for me. It still bothers me. I think this was around February, and even thinking about it now gives me a chill down my spine. I go to a college where I study filmmaking and I was on my way to a music video shoot. I was really tired and my mother knew, so she offered to drive me to the shoot. Me and my mom have always been close. She's always talked to me to get my opinion on problems in her life and emotional issues she's going through. One thing to mention is that me and my mom have a sort of linked intuition. I'm not really someone who believes in crazy spiritual stuff like that normally, but I make an exception when it comes to intuition, because there has been many times in my life where I've had a bad feeling about going to a party or a bad vibe about a person and something fucked up has happened, and even then I think it's probably me rationally analyzing it subconsciously rather than intuition. Anyways. We are driving along, I'm having a cigarette in the car and we're playing music. Me and my mom are talking about very light-hearted stuff, like what me and my girlfriend are up to on the weekend, saying we should go out for dinner with my grandma on the weekend, shit like that, just normal conversation. Around my area there's these windy roads going through almost like small forests. Right, let me get to the point. Something really weird happens as we were going through one of these windy roads. So my playlist comes to an end and me and my mum are laughing about something, and as the music stops everything in the car went silent, meaning we stopped laughing almost instantly. As we go through this bend in the road I get a sickening feeling in my stomach and shivers when my eyes laid on a hump of rubbish, with a blue tarp hanging on a cardboard box, and all of a sudden a very dark thought popped into my head out of nowhere, but I disregarded it as my mind being stupid. We carried on driving and came to the main road, and just before my mum pulled out onto the road she stopped for a second and looked at me and I said, "Did you just get a really bad feeling going through that bit where the rubbish was?" And she gasped and said yes. I explained the feeling I had and she explained she felt the exact same thing, but I was reluctant to say the thought that popped into my head is that I didn't want her to think I was a crazy I get to the video shoot, it goes well. I get a Uber home because it was late and I didn't want my mum to have to come out to get me cause she was saying she was tired. A few weeks passed and I'm out with my friends on a Friday in central London just fucking about, and I go home about 4 o'clock cause they all live in Lewisham and Croydon but I live further away, so I get home and my mum and dad are having a drink in the kitchen, and I'll admit I was a bit high, so I come in and I tell them what I was up to and I'm chilling with them having a few beers for a bit before I go upstairs, and my dad leaves and goes to the bathroom. And I remember that time I was in the car with my mum and that weird thing happened and I bring it up. FYI, I'm a little bit drunk. Mum, do you remember when we were driving along that lane and we got that weird feeling? And she says yeah, she does. I said, yeah, that was really fucking weird. I've never had a feeling like that before. It was the weirdest feeling I've ever had. I stop and look her in the eyes. Did you have a weird feeling about what was in that cardboard box? She said yes. What feeling did you have? Cause I had a feeling there was a dead child in there. My mum interrupts and says at the exact same time. We both said the same thing and a feeling of absolute dread comes over me, and my mum puts her hand over her face in shock. My mum said she didn't want to tell me either, and we talk about it with my dad, who's a very spiritual person, but not the weird crystal type of spiritual. I haven't read over this cause it's late, sorry if this doesn't make any sense, but I get a horrible feeling every time I think about that shit. I never went back to that place since. I've never seen anything in the news recently about a child, but there's been some strange things me and my dad found in my area whilst walking my dog in the woods. But that's a whole other story.